Donald Trump is now simultaneously praising and criticizing the coverage surrounding his wife Melania's convention speech. Of course, Trump tweeted today, and I do quote said tweets, "Good news is Melania's speech got more publicity than any in the history of politics, especially if you believe that all press is good press, and perhaps forget that the Gettysburg Address was delivered." Another tweet criticizing the coverage of the speech says, and I do quote, "The media is spending more time doing a forensic analysis of Melania's speech than the FBI spent on Hillary's emails." End quote. Melania Trump, of course, stands accused of stealing lines from a speech Michelle Obama gave at the 2008 Democratic National Convention. What we have learned is that the campaign, in fact, hired two well-regarded outside speechwriters to craft this key address. They say that they handed their version over about a month ago, but that version did not include the sections lifted almost word for word that were delivered here on Monday night. And then, in fact, the speech delivered by Melania Trump did not, in fact, resemble much of what they had written at all. To discuss it all, we're once again joined by CBSN political contributor Rick Davis. He is the former campaign manager to John McCain in 2008, and Hogan Gidley, the former communications director to Mike Huckabee, also a CBSN political contributor. So, gentlemen, if nothing else, these tweets suggest a couple of things. That somehow he may have grabbed his iPhone and gotten away from whoever it is, may have been keeping the tweeting to a minimum this week. But really, in sending these tweets, he has now seemingly legitimized the story that has really been the talk of this convention thus far. I am not going to ask you, what do you make of the decision to do it, because you will then say, look, nobody makes any decisions for him. But what do you make of their existence?
The existence of the tweets?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he's a prolific tweeter, and he makes good use of hyperbole in his tweets. So it doesn't shock me that he would refer to his wife's speech at the convention, which was a very successful speech by any stretch of the imagination, as the greatest speech in political history. So, I'm going to give him, that's probably pretty moderate by his standards. And I think, look, I mean, everyone's out attacking his wife. And he's a husband, and he wants to protect his wife, and he wants to defend his wife.
Are they attacking his wife?
Well, sure. Yeah, there's no other way to read this. If you're Donald Trump, I mean, forget you and I.
Okay.
If you're Donald Trump and you watch the coverage, you feel like they're attacking his wife. And so I don't blame him for defending his wife. Stand up for your wife is just like stand up for your man.
But
the problem with this is, Josh, we're talking about this speech on day 3.
Right.
This occurred on day 1.
Right.
Okay? And that shows a systematic failure within the campaign to get rid of this at this point. Now, granted...
Is it fair to say these do not help?
It's not that it legitimizes the story, as you said, but it brings it back up. I think that's really the issue. It's not legitimizing it to me. Now, obviously, the first one's clear hyperbole. I've never been a fan of the all press is good press.
My next question, is that true? At a convention, is all press good press?
Obviously not, because we're still talking about the negatives as opposed to the positives. And there have been a couple of really nice things happen here the last couple of days. But I do like the second tweet. The media is spending more time doing a forensic analysis of Melania's speech than the FBI spent on Hillary's email.
Not unlike Hillary Clinton's response last night. If you think Chris Christie can lecture anyone on ethics, I have a bridge to sell you.
Absolutely. I mean, that's politics, and that's part of it. And as Rick mentioned, tweeting he's more than prolific. I'd say it's probably 75% of his campaign has been all using Twitter, and he's got so many millions of followers. He's redefined political warfare to some degree. Because he's been able to run a campaign largely by sitting up at night sending out his thoughts over Twitter. It's amazing.
Well, he can reach, he knows with his Twitter followers, and frankly, whatever it says the millions are, it is now retweeted so much. It is as effective, if not more. Certainly reaches
how much,
quite literally,
impact it.
And to consider what people would pay for an attack ad, if you will, he can just hit send on 140 characters, and it's reaching theoretically, at least as many people in all markets, in all global markets.
Think of the millions that are watching us right now.
Right.
Talk about this tweet, right?
Okay.
So it could have been just one person. But I do think the thing you also have to remember about Donald Trump and all press is good press is that's how he lives.
Yes.
He doesn't mind a shot,
Yes.
right? He'll take the shot. He's gotten just as much negative press as any traditional politician in history, maybe more, because he's lived his life in the public domain, right? Even as a real estate developer, he was in the news a lot. He used the media to sort of brandish his product. He's a uber marketer. When he had The Apprentice, he was used to taking criticism on The Apprentice. He didn't just get lauds; he got critics too. And when you're in show business, you invite criticism.
And when most people get attacked for something that they don't want to deal with, they kind of go into hiding for a while and they're quiet for a while and leave the public sphere. He likes to scrap. He likes to mix it up. So when someone attacks him, it's just another chance for him to go on and defend it, for him to be the spotlight again, and to take control of the narrative, to talk about himself a little bit more. And by the way, I just looked, 9.9 million followers is what he has.
And again, as we mentioned, you can that's exponentially more.
Sure.
Now, I guess let's return to the idea, though, of an attack on his wife. And I'm not, if that's how he has experienced the coverage of the accusation of plagiarism, and I will say accusations, although statistically there is a 1 in a trillion chance that those two passages ended up crafted as they were. It assumes then that there's a zero-sum nature to that assumption, where it turns a completely blind eye to the idea that this was a campaign failure, and that the failure compounded by the evolution of a response yesterday that was really all over the map. I guess I would ask you, how is it possible to see this as an attack on his wife if, by any measure, I've not yet seen someone say that was an awful speech? Everybody tends to preface discussing the accusations of plagiarism with, I thought she did by any measure, I thought she did a nice job. Right. But it's that seems to preclude a personal attack on Melania Trump.
Okay. I need to take you for a moment into the campaign bubble.
Thank you. Please do.
So in the campaign bubble, you have your own reality, right? And you've seen this in campaign after campaign. It's not unusual. It's typical. And in a typical campaign bubble, the candidate turns to his wife and says, "Did you plagiarize your speech?" And her answer is no. Then it didn't happen. And so what you do is you make a decision. If you're the campaign manager like Paul Manafort.
Do you think that decision do you think that discussion
just
happened?
Play with me here for 1 minute.
All right.
And so my wife didn't plagiarize this speech. Fix it. We didn't have a plagiarized speech. So that's the order of the day. And so Paul Manafort's job is within that bubble. He's got confines. He's not allowed to say somebody plagiarized the speech. He's allowed to say the speech wasn't plagiarized.
So he said
that. So when
that,
you're in that bubble
Rick,
and that's your line, you stick to it.
So he stuck to it for perhaps the better part of an hour yesterday morning before then saying
that's the problem.
It may have been subconsciously lifted. Now, at that point, we hadn't heard from speechwriter. So at that point, we only had Melania Trump on record as saying, I wrote the speech with a little help. When Paul Manafort says, she may have subconsciously lifted it, that is Melania Trump one step removed under a bus to a degree. Then it would appear there was some messaging, perhaps in that typical campaign bubble. And then we heard it was Hillary Clinton's fault. Right. And then
he didn't say it was her fault. He said she didn't like it when she feels threatened
he said
by powerful women.
This is what happens when.
This is what happens when. And what his point is I'm not going to talk about the speech.
Yeah.
Is like we've overcome that. And now we're going to talk about the results of that speech, which is Hillary Clinton attacked a woman, and we're going to say, look at this problem over here, not this problem over here.
Rick, then
in the bubble.
Well, I'm going to do to you then what all of you, and by all of you I mean everybody who sat in those chairs, not just for this week but for months now, have said to me when I try to preface questions regarding specifically the Trump campaign. Yeah. You cannot start a question to me with in the typical campaign bubble, because as one of our colleagues said just a couple of days ago, we refer to this graciously as a campaign. Dan Senor came on today and said if by campaign you mean candidate, advance team, and Twitter feed, then okay, this is a campaign. I'll phrase this as I've been phrasing it now for 3 days, to Hogan's point. What does this say about the state of the campaign here on day 3?
What? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and again, that's inherently somewhat of the problem in the sense that we all know, having worked in campaigns, the mechanics of a campaign, what it takes to actually make one of these go off without a hitch. And it's yeoman's work for a very long time to make sure there are no hiccups and there's not a disaster on night 1 that we're talking about on day 3. They don't have that infrastructure, okay? But, again, they've done all of this to this point without the infrastructure. And we were talking off air, but I've made this comment before. I worked for Rick Santorum in 2012, and we finished second behind Mitt Romney. I call it the Santorum syndrome because there was an argument a couple times within the campaign basically telling Senator Santorum, okay, now let's pivot to this, let's move to this. And he said, look, this is what got me here. This is what got me here. I'm not going to change. And it was like, yeah, but now you're here. So now we get into phase 2. And we've been hearing for a long time, night after night, he's going to pivot. He's going to change. Now he's going to, when we get to the convention, he's going to have all these things in place. He still doesn't have those things in place, and he's been successful without them so far. So it would make sense that they think they can continue on without them.
Yeah, and I would remind you that he's not the one saying he's going to pivot.
That's correct.
He's saying, I'm doing it exactly how I've been doing it. And look at the numbers.
It's just wishful thinking, do you think,
even
Rick?
with this traditional campaign that Hillary Clinton's running in Ohio and Michigan, I'm competitive in New Jersey. I'm making new things happen the new way to make them happen. That being said, it doesn't mean there isn't a bubble. And you could argue that there was probably a bubble in the Trump organization before he ever decided to run. He lives a life in the public domain. Mm-hmm. You tend to create those defense mechanisms while you're going through that kind of process, if you're a public official or if you're a media star. He was a media star before he was a politician.
And comfortable in front of the red light. Really part of the irony here is that Melania Trump was the one who actually said, I'm not sure if we're ready for that harsh glare. I'm not sure if I would throw my support behind you, my husband, to run, considering what it is we will face. And now here we are. I do want to read well, this is the 21st century version of having something ripped off the press.
The press release.
This is from the Trump campaign, just released. To whom it may concern, this is the speechwriter in question to whom we have now heard reference. Not the 2 speechwriters who submitted the early draft, but then the woman with whom Melania Trump worked, Meredith McIver. My name is Meredith McIver. I'm an in-house staff writer at the Trump Organization. I'm a longtime friend and admirer of the family. In working with Melania Trump on her recent First Lady speech, we discussed many people who inspired her and messages she wanted to share with the American people. A person she's always liked is Michelle Obama. Over the phone, she read me some passages from Mrs. Obama's speech as examples. I wrote them down and later included some of the phrasing in the draft that ultimately became the final speech. I did not check Mrs. Obama's speeches. That was my mistake, and I feel terrible for the chaos I have caused Melania and the Trumps, as well as to Mrs. Obama. No harm was meant. Yesterday, I offered my resignation to Mr. Trump and the Trump family, but they rejected it. Mr. Trump told me that people make innocent mistakes and that we learn and grow from these experiences. I asked to put out this statement because I did not like seeing the way this was distracting from Mr. Trump's historic campaign for President and Melania's beautiful message and presentation. I apologize for the confusion and hysteria my mistake has caused today more than ever. I am honored to work for such a great family. I personally admire the way Mr. Trump handled the situation, and I am grateful for his understanding. Sincerely, Meredith McIver. Where to begin? It would turn out then that the forensic analysis has revealed something that did in fact happen. What this is now suggesting is that Meredith McIver watched the speech, had it read to her by Melania Trump, may have cut and pasted it, intending to,
she said she did.
Which she said she did.
She did.
So, if nothing else, why didn't we get this 24 hours ago?
48 hours ago.
Right. The night of
36
the
hours.
minute it came out, on Monday
speech.
night. Yeah.
Should have come out the night of the speech. I agree. Can we pull it back up by any chance on there were a couple things I wanted to note in there. The only thing I didn't like about it was that she says in there that she had caused the campaign chaos because she's admitting that there's chaos. Other than that, I think it's absolutely amazing. No harm was meant. We admire Michelle Obama. There's admiration of the First Lady in there. She owned up it was my mistake. I didn't go back and research Michelle's speeches. I just read.
This is the first time we've heard the word mistake used.
Right. And again, once you admit fault and ask for forgiveness, it's up to the. It's no longer on you anymore. People always will say, well, okay, I understand that. And if the media would have got this, if you would have received this statement that night, I think there would have been.
We'd be talking about Donald Jr.'s speech last night and how great it was.
Absolutely. And Chris Christie, we would not be talking about this anymore.
I cannot pretend like we're not actually having this discussion in a bit of a vacuum, which is to say, as a media member, as a journalist, this is the one thing we can't do. It turns out our word is our bond, if you will. And to plagiarize is to fundamentally sacrifice that. Yep. As members of the media now, but also Republican strategists, when certain members of the Trump campaign, for instance, in the last 36 hours, have simply tried to brush this off as this is the mainstream, put in the adjectives you want about the media. It's a witch hunt. We're chasing something that doesn't matter. I don't even want to ask if you think the voters will care. But what have you thought of the media's coverage of this?
Well, I think the media has been fair by the standards that the campaign has set, right? We talked about this on Tuesday morning after the speech, and we said there were two choices that they could make, that they were going to throw a writer under the bus, which we now have seen has happened, or they can stonewall. They decided to stonewall. When you stonewall, you invite then the criticism. If you own up to a mistake and say we've corrected the mistake internally and it won't happen again, then you take the hit that you've made a mistake, but then it's done. And it can be a very humbling experience, and a humbling experience is probably exactly what this campaign probably used from time to time.
Is the media doing its job though at criticism? This is quite literally the pursuit of the truth, literally and figuratively.
Yes, but because of what Rick said, they decided to stonewall. But remember, they didn't stonewall with one forceful, unified message. Right. They stonewalled with 4 or 5 discombobulated messages.
Yeah, they're just not good at stonewalling.
They weren't good at it. But another thing I think that thing does, which is interesting, is she offers a resignation, and Trump says no. People make mistakes all the time. You're on the team. That paints Mr. Trump in a really good light as well. Defends his wife. He defends his staffers when they make mistakes. And that's a really good look for the campaign. Yeah. I just wish it would have come out the night of.
I do think your point, which is part of what your job, more than our job, because we sort of are in and out of this media gig, you are the media gig, is to try and find the truth, right? That's sort of what the third estate is all about, right? Fourth estate,
yes.
Sorry.
All the estates. Yes, all the estates.
Shows you what I know. I don't recognize the judiciary anymore. And not since they became part of the fourth estate.
Some speakers tonight will tell you neither do they if Hillary Clinton's president.
So the pursuit of truth is a fair gig, right? Just tell us the truth, and we'll report that accurately. So I think part of what is sort of the interesting confluence is that you have these tweets last night, or this morning, I guess, that said from Donald Trump himself, hey, get off my wife's back. He was still playing into the scenario while this document was probably being put together to say, hey, leave my wife alone. And then in the meantime, the campaign, the Trumps as a family pivot on this. It's great to pivot. We should spend 2 minutes talking about this, and then we really should get along, because at the end of the day, this is exactly what we thought it was. The truth is now told, and we should accept it and move on.
I want to, though, ask you about another part of it, and it's quite literally the phone call. Meredith calls Melania Trump. What is it that you'd like to say? Who is it that who is it that you admire, and so forth? You made the point yesterday. One of the side issues here for the campaign, if nothing else, if not the party, is that Michelle Obama got a lot of run right in the middle of the Republican National Convention. It was the emotional fulcrum of that speech in 2008. It certainly did what a lot of people hoped Melania Trump would do for Donald Trump that night. It humanized Barack Obama and their relationship and presented him as something other than a mere politician. Is there an issue with now the need to release a statement in which Melania Trump says, boy, I really admire Michelle Obama.
You mean, how do you mean?
I mean,
should that part be in there?
Well, I mean that we have spent 2 days already
talking about Michelle.
Well, talking about hearing Hillary Clinton and having her, the negative, the fear mongering, that you don't want her in this. She's been the most name-checked politician at this convention thus far.
Right.
It has certainly been the thrust, like make it a referendum on Hillary Clinton. But now we do have, and as saying this is going to be a third term of the Barack Obama presidency, now we have Melania Trump saying, boy, that Michelle Obama, she's an admirable.
She's not going that far.
No, I'm parsing this.
But Michelle Obama, the first lady, is very liked, and she's likable.
Mm-hmm.
People like her. And for someone to say, I admire her.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think you're not betraying the Republican Party to say that. And quite frankly, I think it adds validity to the piece, which is, I saw a speech I liked, I admire her, everybody admires her, and I thought some of the language was good in it. I think it's a really good, clear admission. I just wish we'd have seen it the night of. I think it would have been a whole lot more effective.
Rick, only because you and I have spoken about this a lot. Is this done?
This is done. Put a lid on it.
It is, 100%.
Tomorrow's going to be Paul Manafort's favorite day because he doesn't have to answer questions about this anymore.
And but again, even the weird part about that is, and you touched on it, was that as they're putting this out, Trump is tweeting, bringing the story back up. There's no coordination.
Is it any stranger, though, than day one of the convention going off and Donald Trump appearing on a
by the way,
network?
There are no inconsistencies between what Donald Trump tweeted and what this statement says. No inconsistencies.
None whatsoever.
Correct.
But it's just all part of the same narrative.
Right. I'm just saying.
And I would say one thing, just as related to the question about Michelle Obama. Donald Trump had a life before he was the nominee of the Republican Party. And it's really worth pointing out, he was friends with the Clintons. He was friendly with the Obamas. He had a non-political life. And I think part of what the children of Donald Trump and a little bit of what his wife tried to do is to sort of broadcast the fact that he's got a life, right? And Mitt Romney spent an enormous amount of time and money advertising the fact that he didn't need to be president of the United States, to be happy, to be affirmed in his career. And what Donald Trump's doing is, I think, a better version of that, which is, I'm not going to tell you that I don't need to be president. I'm telling you I want to be president. Yeah. And that I've lived a great life. I've had these, multiple careers in business and in the media. And now I want one in politics. And I think it's the kind of thing where we can learn something from this process, where questions like, where did his wife get the material for his speech? Well, from someone she admires. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. We should actually embrace that as part of the positive that's come out of this.
Hogan, I know you spoke of the idea politically that this was a missed opportunity for Melania Trump on Monday night, that the positivity of the message and the delivery got lost in the forensic examination. We still have Eric Trump's speech to Donald Trump's son tonight, which we're told will perhaps be the emotional fulcrum of this evening. Obviously, we have Ivanka Trump introducing her father tomorrow night. Certainly have no reason to expect that won't pack a wallop, certainly for the convention hall. But with Melania Trump, and then what we saw last night from Tiffany and Donald Jr., what have you made thus far of the family's intent this week to humanize their dad, their husband?
I think I wanted to hear a little bit more humanization, if you will, from Melania about Donald. That would have been good for me. But I think her speech was overall, I think, really well delivered in the poise. And again, this is such a hard room to play. And she goes up there with all the poise and grace and is able to pull it off is amazing. Tiffany was good, too. I mean, obviously, a 22-year-old. She's young. She read from the podium. Read from a teleprompter. Needed that. That was good. I wanted a story.
I'm much older than 22. I need the teleprompter.
That's right.
It's okay. It's
but
cool.
I wanted a skin knee story. When I was a kid, I did this, and my dad came in. I didn't really get that from her. Donald Jr. was interesting because he gave his dad a lot of credit for who he was as a man, regardless of what is missing or is included in these speeches. What we can say is, they all love and admire their dad very much, and you can tell a whole lot about a man based on how their children are. And their children, every time I've interacted with them, have been the most gracious, graceful, sweet, precious people I've ever dealt with. Don't seem entitled, don't feel like they. In fact, I was talking to a delegate, and she said her children, she's from Manhattan, her children got to know the Trump family, and they said they were the ones going around college bumming money because their dad wouldn't give it to them, that they had to do all the work. They were the hard working.
Oh, my
group.
God, Trump's a skinflint.
That's right. That's right.
Created a new issue today.
I know, but I mean, she was pointing out that all the children wanted to be friends with them because they were just such nice people. They didn't get rides on helicopters or planes, but they said they were so nice and genuine. And I think that's what the kids are going to continue to do over the course of this convention.
All right. Rick Davis, is this over now?
This is over.
Okay.
This part of it is over. But you know what? Even if it's not over, all press is good press, according to Donald Trump.
That's what they tell me. And the Gettysburg Address has been knocked down to number 2. That's what we know as well. Hogan, Gidley, and Rick Davis, however, unfortunately shackled here throughout the week. Appreciate the time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Our pleasure.